Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back again to the show that never ends. That is Compass Points. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, anything else that gets our attention. I am Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, which covers all of the above. And I am joined by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing, Scott?
I'm doing well. Christmas is coming. Got our holidays. Holidays are gearing up. Lots of activities. On the downside, it's been raining day after day after day.
Has it been raining?
It has kind of dampened my holiday spirit, but
hopefully dampened everything. Everything in East Tennessee, and I don't know exactly how wide this belt of rain is, but it's pretty broad across the southeast. Yes, we are getting waterlogged. I, meanwhile, have had the personal delight this week of an infected tooth. I have a root canal coming next week, my very first one. So anybody out there who wants to send me good feelings and thoughts for that, feel free. Those of you who are watching the video feed may be able to detect a little bit of puffiness on the left side of my face. Got a little bit of a woodchuck thing going on. I'm not currently in a lot of pain, fortunately, but dental work, man. Oof, can't live with it, can't live with it.
Yeah, that's one of those things that it's just, it's never pleasant when you have to have anything more than cleaning.
Yeah.
Is just not pleasant.
Even the cleaning itself is not pleasant.
Yeah, it's not I don't jump up and down for joy whenever I go get my teeth cleaned. But,
yeah. No offense to any dentist in the audience. We love you. We respect your work. Thank you for what you do.
We need you.
Yeah.
Especially this guy next week.
Yeah. All right. So enough moaning and groaning. What else happened this week besides meteorological and oral surgical events? We had actually several items of interest at the school board this week, which we will be talking about in some detail, both among ourselves and then also with our guest this week, School Board Chair Kristi Kristy, joining us. We're going to talk about one of the largest residential developments in county history, took another step forward this week. And let's start out, Scott, by talking about Knoxville Utilities Board's deployment of their new broadband internet system. You had an update on that this past week. How's it going?
Yeah, I thought I would take a look at it, just check in with them and see how they were doing. They've been pretty low key about it. They're not really. They're just going out and having crews stringing cable, and so they say that it's going real well. They have their first phase, which will end shortly after the first of the year. It's basically 3 areas of Knoxville, much of East Knoxville, Park Ridge, Morningside, 5 Points area, parts of North Knoxville, Arlington, which a lot of people don't realize is the name of the neighborhood where Emeryland and Fairmont boulevards go, and then Lincoln Park, which is where you live, and Inskip. So they're all going in. They're getting those 2 areas are in, and they're going to Northwest Knoxville, Cumberland Estates, and Norwood. That area up in there, should be beginning any day now. They've got about 25,000 people will have access to broadband if they want it. They still have to sign up for it, but they're going to have access. They're going to do another 35,000 next year. This is a 7-year rollout. It's costing about $524 million, and they're going. It's interesting when they were talking about how they're going out. They're going out substation by substation. So they'll go to an area, build out to the area that the substation services, and that's the area. And they're trying to
makes sense from a network standpoint.
Oh, yeah,
you bring the service to the hub essentially, and then out from there.
Yeah, that's how it works. So they also are basically moving around. I mean, they're starting the first area they were is includes some of Knoxville's poorest neighborhoods. They're also going next year, going to Union and Granger County, which is those counties are in the service area, and they're going to be working up there. They got a grant to help with the installation of broadband
because there's
infrastructure.
there are grants available for rural broadband deployment.
Right, in unserved areas, and some of those areas are completely unserved by private sector developers. They, like I said, they've been kind of quiet doing this rollout as far as their marketing goes. Really, once it's available in an area, they'll target market in that area. But it's not this, you're not seeing signs, billboards
for people who aren't going to be able to get it for 3 years or whatever.
Yeah, because some people won't be able to get it for 3 or 4 years, and so they're targeting that. They've only started marketing for about a month. They've got about 1,000 subscribers so far, they said, which is out of 25,000. Doesn't sound like much, but they've only been marketing for a month, and it's been very targeted. And they expect to eventually have at least 35% market share.
In the places that they serve.
In the places they serve. But this is a long-term build-out, so this is going to take quite a bit of time. In fact, right now, the only even in the areas North Knoxville and East Knoxville that have access to broadband, the only thing you can get right now is internet service.
Right.
Eventually, you'll be able to get TV and telephone if you so desire, but then those will be rolling out sometime next year as well.
Well, anecdotally, I can say that I am among the first 1,000, I guess, people to sign up because they are in our neighborhood, and they're pricing at $65 a month, which was pretty competitive with what we had through a private provider. We were paying about $60 for a lower. We were paying about $60 for 100 megabyte up to 100 megabyte service. So now we're paying $65 for the up to a gigabyte service, and all I can report is that it works. The speeds are certainly faster. We are not in our house showing gigabyte speeds. We are showing more like 500 megabyte speeds, which is still a lot faster than what we had before. Which is not to say that gigabyte marketing is misleading. There are a lot of different things that can affect the speed that come to an individual house, and then also like what kind of router you have. We did upgrade our router to be able to handle this. Our old router actually couldn't handle that amount of speed, and just there are certain network things or things within the specific design of a particular house or whatever that could limit that too.
Yeah, I talked to a KUB customer who lives in Lincoln Park as well. For the story we ran last week, and she reported 1,000 the gigabyte speed.
Yeah.
She reported
yes, I have other friends who say they're getting the full gigabyte. To be honest, the difference for us anyway right now between 500 megabyte and a gigabyte is probably unnoticeable because basically everything that we want to do, which is watching TVs, having our computers hooked up and our stereo system and everything, like all of that is using a much lower amount of that bandwidth anyway. So again, I'm not making a commercial endorsement here. I'm just saying that we signed up for this, and yes, it works.
Yep. Well, and it's going to be one of the things that they talked about was that they're learning. This is a new venture for KUB, and they're running into some glitches here and there, and they're working through those. And so there will be some glitches moving forward, but it'll get a better sense of it next year. We get more of an update when we've got a broader area that gets coverage and gets service, and so I'm looking forward to kind of tracking this over the next few years, I hope, and see how it goes.
All right. Big development came through the Planning Commission on Thursday. This is Belltown, which you have written about before. It's a gigantic proposed residential, but also some mixed-use components development up in sort of northwest Knox County. What's going on with it?
Yeah, this is the old Bell family farm, and it's it's more than 300 acres on either side of Emory Road, west of Clinton Highway. So it's basically between Powell and Carnes. Local multi-generational builders, Smith Built Homes, is going to basically build a town there. It's going to have more than 1,000 residences. Some about half of them will be single-family detached houses. We're going to have apartments. We're going to have townhouses. There's going to be a commercial node where retail and restaurants and all can be built. And they're also going to have a park along Beaver Creek, which is the southern border of this property. And they're going to donate the park to Legacy Parks Foundation, who will then turn it over to Knox County Parks and Recreation. And it is a huge development. It is going to be another one of those. KUB's taking 7 years to build out. They're going to take 10 years to build out. So it's not going to be plopped down all at once. But it's also it's if the households there have the average number of people living there that the rest of Knox County has, this is the equivalent of putting the town of Jacksboro on
like 2,500 to 3,000 people.
Yeah, and so the Planning Commission. This is a new process for Knox County. It's called Plan Development. It is, we've talked about this before, I believe, but the idea is to give developers more flexibility without them having to go through rezoning, and they give them more flexibility to in designing their developments, but they also have to adhere to guidelines and provide a public benefit. In this case, the public benefit will be that park. It'll be about a 40-acre park, kayak launch site there,
on Beaver Creek.
On Beaver Creek, and some trails and all, and so it'll be and one of the things are going to be, it's one of those things that you turn it over to Parks and Recreation. You're going, oh well, that means Parks and Recreation is going to have to pay for upkeep and everything, and they certainly will. But the development will have a homeowners association, and each residence will be charged $5 a month, and that a fee that will go to help maintain the park. That's the plan there. Anyway,
public-private partnership.
Yeah, and the big thing, of course, is if you've traveled West Emory Road, west of Clinton Highway, you will remember that it is a 2-lane road.
Yes, it is a 2-lane road.
And it's already busy, especially since this end is closer to Clinton Highway, which is a major thoroughfare, so there's a lot of traffic there already. And the traffic study that came with this proposal has basically they're going to double the traffic. This
for that stretch of the road.
For that stretch from Clinton Highway and further west of the development itself. And the developers are going to pay for road improvements. They're going to put a traffic light in. They have 2 streets that are going to cross Emory Road from the south end to the north end of this development, and there's going to have a traffic light at one of those intersections, crosswalks, and a system for pedestrians, sidewalks throughout the the development as well. But the road improvements are going to have go from 2 lanes to 3 lanes, which means a turn lane in the middle, a left turn lane in the middle, and then plus right turn lanes on the outsides of the street to facilitate right-hand turns into the development. So, and it's even going to require improvements to the Clinton Highway intersection with West Emory Road, and they're going to pay for that too. And all this is in this. One of the things about the plan development process is the developer comes up with this plan, and the Planning Commission approves it, and that's basically, and it does go to County Commission eventually. That's it. So everything needs to be spelled out in their plan. And one of the things was the Planning Commission placed 11 conditions on them that they have to meet in order to proceed with, or to fully develop the property. One of them is the park donation, and one of them is the road improvements, and that they're going to pay for the road improvements. So all these conditions have been placed on there. It seemed it was interesting at the meeting last Thursday. They spent a lot of time talking about what they could and couldn't do, and how to make these these conditions, how to word them and things, because this is the first time they've ever done it. Mm-hmm. And so they're kind of learning as they go there, and just like KUB is on their rollout. But now the development plan is in place. It goes to County Commission next. If County Commission approves it, then probably next summer, once they get permits and stuff, they'll start breaking ground and doing some stuff. And in 2032, we'll have another town.
It'll all be built out.
Yeah, we'll have another town in Knoxville.
So, was there any significant opposition from people who live around there? Because obviously it's a fairly big potential impact.
Yeah, well, this is the second time that it's actually been discussed in public in county, in the Planning Commission. The first time they came in with kind of a concept plan and got it critiqued. And then this time they brought in, and this is what we're going to, the plan is, this is what we're going to do. Last time there were several people who spoke out against it, primarily traffic, and primarily the fact that this is a big development in a rural area. Mm-hmm. These are themes that come up regularly in Planning Commission deliberations. There were a couple people who spoke. Kevin Murphy from the Knox Planning Alliance, and then a neighbor came, and she was very concerned about the traffic and the impact there primarily. She was also has one of her husband's ancestors is buried on the property. Mm-hmm. So she was really intent on making sure that gravesite wasn't disturbed. There's a whole cemetery on the property that they're going to have to work around, because you have to work around cemeteries. Right. You can't just
bulldoze them.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Also, not a good idea if anybody's ever seen Poltergeist. Just clearly not not something you should do in building a subdivision. Yeah. Well, and so this is also interesting, because Smith Built is a well-known local developer who mostly does conventional, kind of suburban, single-family housing subdivisions. Yeah. They're kind of scattered all over the county. This is them kind of taking seriously, it seems like, the discussion that's happened recently and as part of the advanced Knox planning process about the need for a greater diversity and variety of housing forms, that we don't just need more single-family houses, but more multifamily, just kind of more options for people at different points in their lives, maybe at different economic price points and so forth. And then also including some amount of commercial development right there, so that you're not creating a whole bunch more sprawl where it's yet another subdivision where everybody's going to have to drive 7 miles just to get to the grocery store. I guess depending on what kind of commercial goes in there, it's clearly not going to be like a full service probably town. No. But it does seem like it's kind of taking those ideas seriously and actually incorporating them.
Yeah, Josh Sanderson, who is one of the Smith-Built representatives, and he's the one who's been talking the most at county commission or at planning commission, has said, this is a departure. This is new for us. It's new for planning commission. It's new for them. But yeah, one of the things about this development that he has used as a selling point is that they're going to be in the residential area, which is the single family residential area, which is north of Emory Road, is they're going to have an area where they're going to be kind of larger lots, bigger houses, higher price points. They're going to have a lot with smaller lots and lower price points. One area is going to have have almost like a grid in houses served by alleys, just like in
like a more urban neighborhood,
in the middle of downtown Knoxville. Then on the south side of Emory Road, they're going to have apartments, they're going to have townhouses. We're going to have a section that's kind of reserved for seniors, in addition to the commercial node, which is going to be on the south side. And Sanderson is big on saying that you can have multiple generations of your family living here. You can have grandma and grandpa can live in the senior area. The mom and dad can live in a single family house there. The kids, the adults can live in the apartments, and so you can have multiple generations in different properties here if you want, and also it is they are trying to make it walkable, but Sanderson the other last Thursday at the meeting was saying that he's kind of hoping it becomes more of a golf cart community where people can take golf carts down from their single family house
down to the grocery store,
down and cross Emory and go to dinner at the in the commercial area. I don't think that the commercial area is going to be big enough for a grocery store, and there are grocery stores on Clinton Highway, so
right.
That's probably where. But then again, like any other development, with this coming in, there may be other businesses, maybe grocery stores, maybe something else that will want to locate closer to it.
Right. To benefit from that new market.
Right. If you're going to have 4,000 people living right there, I mean that's a good chunk. You might have what that might end up doing. But looking at the crystal ball, is it might end up pulling development down Emory Road from
the Clinton Highway direction, right?
Yeah, because that will there are enough people with Belltown and then the neighborhoods on either side of Clinton Highway. You've got that critical mass of people that would support businesses.
All right. Well, we will continue to watch that for sure. All right, let's talk about Knox County Schools. The school board had its monthly work session and voting meeting this past week, and actually several things of interest on it. They had a resolution that they passed, which we talked about last month because it was actually proposed last month, where the school board unanimously declared their opposition to a new state law that essentially, it's a little complex, but it could lead to a majority of all third grade students in the state being held back every year, because the way the law is written says basically any third grader who doesn't score proficient on the third grade ELA, English Language Arts state standardized test, would not be eligible to move to fourth grade, with a couple of caveats. They could take an intensive summer course and retest. They could opt to go to fourth grade and do year-long intensive tutoring, take the test again. But in that case, if they're still not scoring proficient, they would be held back in fourth grade. And to put this in context, in Knox County, And I don't think there are many counties in the state where this number is a lot higher. Only about 40% of third graders every year actually score proficient on this test, because proficiency on this test does not just mean you can read. It doesn't just mean that you can, sound out a word or identify the alphabet or whatever. It's really looking for reading comprehension. And I think that's one thing people possibly including our state legislators when they pass this law, you can imagine them looking at it and saying, this is terrible. We can't be promoting people to fourth grade who can't even read, and not being proficient on this does not mean you can't read. So I think that's one sort of disconnect that happened in this law being passed. But so the Knox County School Board, like school boards across the state now, passed a resolution basically saying that we think that this should really be a local decision about whether or not to hold a kid back. I think that they're very open to the idea of these intensive summer schools, the idea of intensive tutoring in fourth grade for students who haven't scored at that proficiency level. It's just kind of taking away that kind of punitive measure of we're going to hold you back, because as Superintendent John Ryswick said, there really isn't any data showing that holding kids back actually improves anybody's academic performance, and can have a lot of negative social and emotional, kids feel, even if the intent isn't punitive, it can feel punitive, and kids can feel sort of stigmatized, like all your other friends and classmates get to go on, and here you are back in third grade. So that's one concern. The school board did attach to this resolution a set of metrics that they would prefer to use, which is taking a more comprehensive look at the student, their overall performance, their maturity levels, basically the things that they use right now. And that's really what they're asking. They're asking the state for changes in this law, which is only taking effect now this school year. But really what they're saying is, why don't you let us keep doing what we're already doing? We already have teachers and administrators who are evaluating and assessing these kids on a whole range of things, day to day and week to week, whereas this law is really just taking that one state test, one data point, 1 day's worth of testing. And that is one of the factors that they say they consider is the state test, but they want to be able to consider more. One of the things that was interesting about this was it was actually proposed by Catherine Bike, who's a new school board member representing the 4th District in West Knoxville, because she said she heard a lot of complaints or concerns about this law from parents and from teachers. And she is also one of the new Democratic members of the school board. And we've talked about before that we do have a partisan school board now with a Republican majority, and Bike is in the minority of that. And we have already seen a little bit of a tendency for that board sometimes when ideas are proposed by people in that minority group, which is really kind of 2 Democrats and 2 independents at the moment, that the majority sometimes can feel a little resistant to, like, do we really want? But in this case, I think when you have even Republican legislators, which has happened, coming forward and saying, yeah, this law, they passed it in a special session really quickly in January 2021, and they have kind of Mark White, who's the chair of the House Education Administration Committee, has come out and said, yeah, I'm hearing about this from every school system in the state. Clearly we're going to have to do something. We don't know yet what. And one point that Susan Horn, a school board member, made as they voted for this resolution this past week was that this is not, for parents who are concerned about it, who have been contacting the school board, she's like, okay, we've done what we can do now. We've passed a resolution asking the legislature, but the legislature is the ones who are going to have to act on this. And so people who are concerned about it need to contact their legislators.
That's one thing that I believe that the legislators who pushed this during the special session, had good intentions. But one thing that appears, and I don't know what they did leading up to this, that this dialogue, if you will, with school systems across the state could have happened a year ago.
Yeah.
And informed the special session so that, because I'm sure that if someone said, in discussions with school officials from across the state, we'll just hold everybody back in the 3rd grade.
Right.
They would have said, no, wait a minute. And they would have been able to hammer out a a bill that would now have to be amended in a year later.
Well, and State Rep Gloria Johnson, who's a Democrat, one of the few Democrats in the Knox County delegation, and is a retired teacher herself, has made the point that, as she put it, we tried to tell them this. We said this wasn't a good idea, and that the Republican supermajority went ahead and did it anyway. And I do think, it kind of speaks to this philosophical bent sometimes that comes into education discussions where people want to look at test scores. And, if you look at either a school or a student where they're not achieving at the level that the state has said we want them to be achieving at, of course, you can respond to that in different ways. And one way you can respond to that is to say, this school's just doing a terrible job, or even this student is doing a terrible job, and therefore we're going to crack down on them to make them work harder and somehow do better, like this kind of punitive approach, like we're going to flog them until they perform better. Or, and I think this is the way that probably most teachers and education experts would prefer to look at it, is to say, well, that's where you've identified your challenges. That's where you've identified the problems. Yes, not everybody's going to achieve at the same level, and there's a bunch of different reasons for that. And if you actually want to improve people's achievement, then you use those, it's not that you don't test people, it's that you use those test scores as indicators that, well, here's where we need to devote more attention and probably more resources, as opposed to just, well, here's where we need to go in and yell at people and beat them up and hope that that's some. And that's where, that kind of holding back, that punitive side to that feels a little bit like we're going to punish these 8-year-olds because they're not meeting our state metrics yet, instead of really trying to figure out how to get them up. And so I won't be surprised if what comes out of this is maintaining some of the things that are in it, like those intensive either summer school or tutoring or whatever, but maybe either taking away or reducing that sense of the kind of stigmatization and punishment, because I don't really think anybody's goal is to punish a third grader for not being able to read sufficiently. I think the goal is to get them to read better. Right. And so that's probably where this conversation is going to head.
Yeah, it's kind of like building codes.
Right.
Yeah. Building codes are there, in codes enforcement officers go in and look at whatever they're going to be looking at. And they don't want to punish the property owner. They want the property owner to do it the right way. And so,
although there are some developers out there who would tell you that it can feel pretty punitive.
It can feel punitive, and I'm sure that there will still be instances when third graders would be held back under whatever they do. But the goal is to get them to read better.
Right.
The goal in the codes thing is to get to build a better, or at least a
safer
or whatever building. And this is okay. Let's get this kid reading on a higher level, and like you said, the intensive tutoring in fourth grade, the summer sessions, all those things are great tools, or could be great tools to achieve that.
Right.
But if there's a way you can get students to do that, and parents to get their children to do that, without it seeming so punitive, might be more effective.
Also, the school board this week, they had a report presented on playgrounds. And so here's an interesting thing about Knox County Schools. Knox County Schools doesn't build playgrounds. You think they have 50-some elementary schools. Almost all those elementary schools have playgrounds. They're on school property. So you might assume that those are school district playgrounds. But in fact, for about 30 years now, it's a little unclear actually exactly when this practice started, but it appears to date from around when the old city school system shut down and the county absorbed all those old city schools. The county stopped paying for playgrounds. They pay for everything else, all the rest of school infrastructure, the buildings, the bathrooms, the roofs, etc., but they don't pay for playgrounds. And so for a couple of generations now, that has really been left to parent-teacher organizations, community groups, whoever, if they have an old playground with equipment that needs to be replaced, or they just want to build a whole new one or whatever, they've had to raise money to do that, with the probably unsurprising result, and this is what was in this report that was presented to the school board this week, that most of the schools that currently have the worst playgrounds with the most equipment that is in disrepair, in a lot of cases where they can't even get replacement parts because the vendor maybe doesn't exist anymore, the vast majority of those are in low-income areas, which is certainly not surprising that areas with more affluent parent populations have been more able over time to raise money to build new playgrounds than those in lower income areas. And it was actually County Commissioner Larson Jay who first came to the school board about this last spring, because he had been drawn in as a public official and a kind of philanthropist. He had been drawn into fundraising efforts for a couple of local elementary school playgrounds and gotten interested in it and started digging into it and kind of realized that, like this is all happening because the school system, just as a matter of practice, it's not even a written policy, he found out in trying to track it down. As a matter of practice, they just don't budget for playgrounds. They don't pay for playgrounds, period. And so this report was done kind of showing that actually about 60% of playgrounds across the county need some degree of work, prioritized as levels 1, 2, and 3. And as I said, the level 1 ones, the worst ones, are heavily concentrated in more low-income areas. The rest are kind of spread around the county. And there was an estimate that to bring all of them up to par, sort of like with the wave of a wand, would cost probably $4 to $5 million. That's not a super solid figure, but that was the estimate. And then if they did that, then it would cost the school system, if the school system were to take on the responsibility for maintaining them and kind of replacing them on an ongoing basis, probably cost them close to $600,000 a year out of their budget, which would frankly be a very tiny portion of the total county budget, total schools budget. So now the discussion is, what's going to happen next? There seems to be some, several board members did speak up and say, well, playgrounds aren't just sort of a nice frill to have. They're actually really central to the educational mission. There is a lot of data that children, especially young children, really need. There's a strong connection between physical activity and cognitive development, and that you kind of, you kind of spend a few hours, hunkered down, absorbing a lot of information in the classroom. The ability to go outside, run around, and move actually helps you physically and mentally both recharge and then be ready for the next lesson or whatever. And also, there's a lot of value in play. There's lots of study of this, that kids learn a lot by playing together, how to work out differences, how to cooperate, and so forth. So lots of school board members said, yes, playgrounds really are important. They don't really cost that much. To build a new one right now is running in the $300,000 to $400,000 range. So you look at, they just built 2 new schools, Lonsdale and Adrian Burnett, which are both like $20 million or so each. It would not have been a lot to add $300,000 to either of those budgets to pay for them, but they didn't. And so now they have 2 new schools opened that don't have playgrounds. Brand new schools, no playgrounds. Yes. And so I think there will be further discussion of this. School board member Daniel Watson said he's going to come back. He's going to go and have some conversations to see if there might be options for, like, maybe the city, maybe the county, maybe some foundations or private groups might kick in some funding together with the school system to maybe do that initial first big lift of bringing all of their playgrounds up, and then kind of see how they can fund them on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, well, and that will be, that you think that the ongoing funding for maintaining them will be the easiest lift there. However, the Knox County Schools is having a hard time keeping their schools' interiors clean.
Yes, that was another thing that came up this week. Superintendent Ryswick talked about there was actually a contract on the school board agenda for this past week, which got deferred until January. But it's a contract with a local private custodial company to basically, the school system has custodial staff in all of its schools, but Ryswick provided this report showing that in, I think it was 16 of their schools, their custodial staffing is at 60% or less of its budgeted level. And the worst was Northwest Middle School, which has, I think, 6 budgeted custodial positions, and currently only one of them is filled. Northwest Middle School is a pretty big school, if anyone's been there.
It's a big school, and there's one employee responsible for cleaning
Right.
all those bathrooms, mopping all those floors, all of the things that custodians do.
Maintaining the HVAC system.
Yeah. So they've got one person there.
So initially, when this contract kind of came to light, there was a flurry of people saying, are they outsourcing their janitors? That was a proposal about 10 years ago under former Superintendent Jim McIntyre to just outsource the whole county custodial staff to private companies. And he presented it at the time as a cost savings measure. Which, if you think about it, the custodians are already pretty low paid. The school system has increased their salary. Like they just got an 8% raise this past year. I won't be surprised to see another proposed raise in the coming year because they're having so much trouble hiring people. But still, those positions are only starting a little over $10 an hour. So compared to a lot of what you can get even in the private sector now, it's not super competitive. But Ryswick said this is not outsourcing. We're keeping all the staff that we have. We're trying to hire more. We want to have custodians as school employees. This is just a, as he said, hopefully temporary measure. And also the private companies would not be cleaning during the school day, so they wouldn't have interaction with students. The custodians who are actual school employees would be the ones there during the day. Then the contracted employees, contracted janitors would come in the evenings and clean up. But it is if you read local social media, lots of accounts from teachers about them having to kind of clean their own rooms, not because anyone has assigned them to, but because nobody else is doing it, because they don't have enough people to do it.
Maybe, just maybe, in the elementary schools at least, you take those third graders who don't score efficiently,
Right.
and you make them clean the schools.
That's right, kid. You can't read, huh? Here's a mop. Going to prepare you for the economy. No, I don't think they will do that.
I don't think. I wasn't exactly serious.
But we talked about all of these things and a few other issues with our guest this week in the podcast interview, School Board Chair Kristi Kristy. So let's go ahead and roll that tape. Joining us this week on the podcast is Kristi Kristy, who is chair of the Knox County Board of Education. She represents the 9th District, which basically covers all of South Knoxville and South Knox County. She was just reelected to a second term in office, and also in September was reelected to a second year as board chair. So welcome, Kristi. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for asking me. Happy to be here.
So the school board dealt with a couple of kind of high-profile issues in the past month or two here. I thought we could start off by catching up on a couple of those. Wednesday night, you approved a resolution basically asking the state legislature to revisit this law that would mandate that third grade students who don't perform up to a certain level on the state reading test either be held back a year or have to undergo sort of intensive tutoring, potentially be held back in fourth grade if they don't show improvement. So can you just kind of talk about like what are the concerns with that law and what are the things that the board would like to see instead?
Well, I think that, and just to be clear, this was actually in our legislative priorities from last year, right? So this was something that we as a board had previously discussed as being a concern. Obviously, I don't know if you followed the meetings. There were a lot of concerns there. Some of the stipulations to not holding students back, attendance at summer school and interventions and whatnot. And, to be honest, by third grade, you're probably already a little behind, right? If you're just identifying this at third grade, what I would like to see, if they are going to have something like this, I think that we need to start before third grade at really, if you want to make an impact, I think that you have to look before third grade. I do think that you have to give there needs to be some local control in there, right? I mean, we talk about children with learning disabilities, parental input, things like that. I do think that as it was written was not good, because
it was basically
complained about it, right?
It's taking that one measure, the state test, and kind of
right.
what you all put in your resolution, the kind of metrics that you thought should be used are essentially what happens now, right? These are the things that are where the student is academically, emotionally, and kind of things that teachers are going to have a much better sense of that student, right, than just that one state test.
Right, exactly. And our teachers know our students, and, their parents know them. That I understand the intention and thought process behind it, because we talk about how critical third grade reading is. And even Representative McKenzie, when he came to spoke, he said, I supported this, right? I mean, it had bipartisan support. So I don't, we beat up on state a lot. I don't necessarily think there was ill intent there. I just, don't think that they considered everything they needed to consider going into it.
Well, and it includes, obviously, some added resources, intensive summer school programs or intensive tutoring in fourth grade. I mean, are there some
I think that was
that you'd like to see maintained?
Right. And I think that might have been their intent when they, listening to, like I said, Representative McKenzie, it sounded like their intent was to encourage or to make sure that students were taking advantage of the summer school and tutoring. I think that was maybe some of the thought process behind it was, we're providing these resources and we want, students in need to take advantage of them. Of course, like I said, as written, it was not good at all. And I think they probably all realize that.
Well, and I think one thing that people maybe get hung up on with it is when you hear that only 40% of Knox County third graders test as proficient on reading, people think that means that 60% of third graders can't read.
Can't read.
That's not actually what that means.
Not the case at all, right? Fortunately, that's not the case.
Right.
But yeah, that's the part people get hung up on. They think that our vast majority of our third graders can't read. And that, could they read better? Yes. but it's not like we're starting, with nothing there. But I do think that the interventions and the tutoring was more what their intent was.
Well, and so obviously other school boards across the state have passed similar resolutions.
Oh, yeah.
And there was,
and even talking to state reps, we were at TSBA in Nashville, and I think Jennifer Owen brought this up in Monday's meeting, when she and Dr. Reiswick were in a session with Mark White, and he said, well, pretty much when we get a resolution from every district in the state, we know that we've messed up, right? And we're going to have to revisit this. So I am hopeful that they will go back and fix it.
Well, we'll certainly follow that when the legislature comes back. There was also talk this week about playgrounds. And I think some people may be surprised to know, although it's been a practice for a long time now, that the school system does not pay for playgrounds, either when a new school is built or if an older school needs a replacement. So can you kind of talk about that issue a little bit and where you see that going? Because there was also discussion of, well, there are a lot of priorities in our schools. Playgrounds are only one of them.
All right. And I believe I mentioned some of those concerns last night. I don't think there's anyone on the board or in the community that would argue that playgrounds are a bad thing, right? I mean, we all want our kids to be able to play. We all want them to have good playgrounds. Now, do I think you have to have a $600,000 playground to be able to play outside? Not necessarily. I think that you can get creative and play outside without a structure, but new schools need playgrounds. I think that we could probably all agree on that. And moving forward, that's probably something that needs to be just included in that capital plan for that new school.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that. And I think that we will make sure that all of our new schools in Adrian Burnett and Lonsdale have playgrounds. I do feel confident that will happen.
Right, because we have Adrian Burnett and Lonsdale just opened brand new buildings this fall. Everything there is new, but they don't have playgrounds, right?
Right. And to be fair, I know, Jennifer brought up last night, well, why was this not included? Because this was their policy. You have to keep in mind too, we have a brand new director of operations and a brand new superintendent. So, especially when you talk about director of operations, I mean, that's a heavy lift. Mm-hmm. And when you're brand new on the job, I mean, it's like drinking from a fire hose at first, right? So I do think that they are working really hard to correct some of these situations, but I do think that, it's probably going to take a little time to get there. But I think we will fix that with the Lonsdale and Adrian Burnett. As far as ongoing funding of playgrounds, we talk about budget and where your priorities are going to be. And yeah, the money's there right now, but when you commit to this, it's easier to give than it is to take away. And then you hit a bad budget year. Where's that money going to come from?
Would you be open to, there was some discussion about maybe other partners, city or county or private donation foundations or whatever, being willing to cut? Because I think there was this estimate of $4 to $5 million. Nobody really knows how much to kind of bring all of the playgrounds up to par. Is that something that you think the board would look at if other people were willing to chip in a couple of million or whatever, also put some school fund balance toward that to fund that?
Right. And the county put in $400,000 for schools to apply for matching grants for various things. I think a couple of my South Knoxville schools had applied for some of those. And definitely I would be open to something like that, year to year as, if we could work that into the budget as well. I just, worry when you think about things like our HVAC systems. I was talking to our director of operations the other day, and apparently there's some new state laws regarding sale of HVAC equipment and the old R22 systems, which probably most of our schools are. And there's going to be some issues getting parts. I mean, they're probably all going to have to be replaced in the coming years. And, that, I don't know if anybody's priced a HVAC system on a school recently, but those are pretty hefty bills and contracts. So, when you come down to things like that and you hit a bad budget year, what's going to happen? That's just where my concern is. Of course, if the money's there, then absolutely, let's do it. And I do think things like mulch could probably be built into the budget where our PTAs weren't having to pay for mulch, because that can get expensive. Things like that.
Right.
And I would be open to, if Parks and Recs or the county commission thinks that they can do this better. Mm-hmm. I'm open to if Parks and Recs want to assume control of playgrounds, and
right,
we can have that discussion too if Commissioner Jay wants to carry that.
Take help if somebody
county commission.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know that would be widely supported on county commission, but I'm absolutely willing to have that discussion if he wants to bring that forward.
Kristi, another issue that's come up recently has been the a dire shortage of custodial staff. I believe it's 16 schools that have either 60% or fewer of their allotted custodians. Northwest Middle just has one.
Southwell Middle?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you guys are going to be considering a contract with a custodial firm to help keep the schools clean. What is the long-term solution? I know you guys raised pay this year. Is that going to take more pay or just more aggressive marketing? What's it going to take to the long-term solution?
Yeah, I think pay is going to be the number one key there, right? And I do think that's something we are going to have to take a hard look at again this year. Custodians or cafeteria workers, definitely we're probably going to have to bump the pay up. Short term, we don't really have a lot of options right now, right? I mean, we did bump it up last year. We actually tried some creative things like providing transportation to some of these schools that are harder to staff. This was just another way of trying to get support to those schools. Supplemental, I think that's critical to point out that this was supplemental. This is to help the people that are trying to cover those schools. When you have one custodian covering a school the size of Northwest Middle, that's a problem. Not intended to replace anyone, but we have to have clean schools. And we get a lot of complaints about not having clean schools. And if we have to look at creative ways to where we can at least fix the short term, while we look at long-term solutions.
And I think
I honestly don't think we have much of a choice in that, to be completely honest about it.
And that contract, I think, is maybe going to come back in January for you all to look at the janitorial services.
I actually think we're probably going to see more schools added to it. I think that's why it was pulled, was because we realized that we're probably going to have to need more than what we originally thought we might.
So a big picture question, obviously a couple of months ago when the school system got back state test scores and data from last year, Knox County ended up ranked low on the state's list overall as a district in need of improvement. And there were a couple of factors that really weighed on that. Attendance was one of them. And the sort of academic gains from year to year, as opposed to the absolute scores, were the two biggest ones. And Superintendent Ryswick came out with a plan, and of course a lot of the things that are in the plan to address that were things he had already announced in terms of the way he's organizing and prioritizing things in the district. What in your mind are, first of all, parents hearing that, oh no, our school system ranks like toward the bottom of the state, how should they interpret that? And secondly, what do you think are the keys to kind of bringing all of that up?
I think attendance is one of the bigger keys. I mean, if parents are concerned, one of the things I would stress is that your child needs to be in school, right? I mean, we can't teach kids that aren't in school. And that's something I hear from my administrators constantly. They really struggle with absenteeism. And, it is a problem because how as a district can we fix that? I mean, we can't send people out looking for kids. I mean, then they're not in the classrooms, they're not in the schools. So, I don't have an easy answer for that. I think that is one of the big issues. I do think that COVID has impacted learning. Virtual learning is, kids typically don't learn as well virtually as they do in the classroom. Some kids do, but most kids do not. I just think there's a whole lot of factors that come into play there. I am optimistic. I do think that Superintendent Ryswick has a good plan, and he's been very intentional in trying to put resources into areas where we can, come back up and continue to improve.
Well, and I guess just overall, so Superintendent Ryswick has been on the job for about 6 months now. He has had time to kind of make his appointments and do some of the organizational restructuring. How are things going? I know you're still a year out from when you're going to give him his first official evaluation, but how do you feel like that whole new team is doing so far?
Well, just speaking for myself and my perspective, from the South Knoxville perspective, I've gotten some positive feedback with the new structuring from some of my principals. I was at Moreland Heights the other day, and the principal there was telling me that some of the people that have been coming in and helping his teachers with math and reading from that district team have really been beneficial to them. He's felt very supported by, his regional director. So I've heard a lot of really good feedback in those terms. Like, I haven't been all over the district, and I don't talk to people in other areas all that much unless they reach out to me. But I feel like it's going well for us in South Knoxville. I mean, it's a difficult time to be in education right now. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, everything is just great, everyone's happy in the schools, because that would clearly be a lie. We have struggles, and we know that. But I do think that there is some educators are tired, administrators are tired. But I do pick up on some optimism there that, we're going to get through this, and things are going to get better on the other side. But it's going to take a little time. I mean, we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of this position overnight.
Right. All right. Well, that seems like a good place to leave it. So thanks again for giving us a couple of minutes, and we'll be
thanks for having me.
Checking in as all of these things continue to unfold.
Yeah. Well, you have my number, so just give me a call.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Kristi.
Thanks again to Kristi for joining us. Always happy to talk to her. And now we are to the Q&A portion of the podcast, where we have questions come in from readers, often through our Facebook page. This week we actually had an email from a reader, which was just sent sort of as a question, but I thought it would be worth talking about a little bit in the context of the podcast. And the reader was raising some questions and or maybe objections a little bit to our discussion last week of the bills that have been proposed in the legislature having to do with gender-affirming care for people under the age of 18 and with limiting the attendance of drag shows for people under the age of 18. And basically the person was saying that they thought that we were presenting more opinions about those bills than facts about them, but really asking, well, what's, because what we were talking about was an article that I had written talking to LGBTQ advocates about, because we had talked about those bills before. Right. This article was talking to advocates about how they were kind of gearing up to try to address and really fight those bills in the legislature. So we didn't really recap kind of the rationale behind those bills. But I think that I'm going to go ahead and say, so first of all, on the podcast, we do have sort of a loose conversational style. I'm sure there are times that more of our personal views on things are discernible maybe than in our news content, whether it's in what we say or just how we say it. It's not that we don't have any opinions on anything, of course, but we do try to stick to the facts, what we can, factually say, including times where maybe statements by public officials don't really comport with the facts. And I think that this is one of those cases. So one thing I want to say up front is when it comes to LGBTQ issues and sort of like our state government's approach to these in recent years, I have a lot of friends who are gay and lesbian. I have several actually close friends who are parents of transgender children, minor children in some cases, in other cases, children who did some degree of transition when they were minors and are now adults. So I know a lot of people and care about a lot of people who are directly affected by these things. These are complicated issues. People have a range of thoughts and ideas and opinions about them for sure. But, it's hard not to look at the range of anti-LGBTQ legislation that either gets proposed or passed in our state legislature every year and not perceive it as essentially a legal attack on a minority group. That is what's going on. I don't think that's a matter of opinion. These are people who are being singled out for their identities, for their sense of themselves, and people who do not demonstrably pose any threat or danger to the rest of society. And so that's one of the things with these bills. There is this bill against gender-affirming care for minors that is rooted almost entirely in this rhetoric around child mutilation and how this is damaging to people. The problem with that narrative is that it comes from one guy. It comes from this very outspoken anti-trans advocate, Matt Walsh, who now lives in Nashville. He's the nation's leading anti-trans advocate. And when he went after the pediatric transgender clinic at Vanderbilt Hospital, he didn't come with any data saying, here's all of the times when they've done something that then they got sued over, or then people who received their treatment were dissatisfied with. He presented nothing. All he said was, look at this thing they're doing, and then talked about it in this extremely inflammatory language, not mentioning that essentially everything they do is in line with established national and international medical and psychological protocols. They are professionals following those protocols, because that's something that we as reporters would look at is like, well, is there a hospital clinic that is not following, protocols? Like what's going on here? What is the data? What is the underlying rationale for this legislative assault on medical care? And it's lacking. It's not there. It's not presented in the bill that's been presented. And so when we have legislators presenting bills and they can say it's because we want to stop, child mutilation, but they don't provide any evidence that quote unquote child mutilation is what's going on, or that any violation of any kind of medical standards or practices is going on, or that any of the people who have received care through this have raised objections about it or come back and said, this is terrible. How can the state allow this atrocity to go on? None of that. There's none of that. So if you want to know why do they say they're doing it, why do the legislators who propose these bills say they're doing it? They say they're doing it to protect children. And we have said that. We have reported that is their given reason. That is factual. However, it is also factual that there's no data, no evidence, no anything to suggest that the harms they allege are happening, that, for example, there's any evidence that a 14-year-old seeing a drag show, which again is just somebody dressed up as a person of a different gender. If your kid has watched Mrs. Doubtfire, your kid has seen a drag show. There's no evidence that there's any harm from any of these things. And so when we have legislators proposing bills that clearly, and let's be honest, we have a long history, and it's not just in this country, it's kind of every culture in the world, a long history of singling out minority groups, marginalized groups who a lot of people don't understand or are afraid of or otherwise have issues with, religious objections, any number of different objections people can have to various minority groups, singling them out and making them kind of scapegoats. The whole origin of the word scapegoat literally comes from this practice. It's an ancient practice in human history of singling out some marginalized minority group and rallying everybody around sort of in hatred of them. And so when we see these kinds of things happening, we're going to say that, the given reason for this is this, but this clearly falls into a very long pattern. Gay and lesbian people have been called child molesters and child predators for decades. That's one of the oldest slurs against them. They're a danger to your children. The very first anti-gay rights group in America was called Save Our Children. People probably remember it. It was Anita Bryant's group formed in Florida in the 1970s to fight against basic gay rights. It was in reaction to, it didn't have anything, the things they were fighting against didn't have anything to do with children. It was basically, there was the first ordinance in the country, I think passed in Miami, basically saying that gay and lesbian people could not be evicted from their housing just because they were gay and lesbian, because that was something that used to happen. And that was the level of rights they were looking for. But the group that formed to fight them was called Save Our Children. So there's always been this narrative with no data to support it. Gay and lesbian people are not any threat to anybody's children any more than anybody else. And so, I guess if you have the view and opinion that gay and lesbian people or trans people are objectionable in some way, then maybe us saying that there's no factual basis for them being perceived as a threat to children might feel like an opinion to you. And obviously, I am very sympathetic to gay and lesbian people. I am sympathetic to transgender adolescents and to their parents, again, some of whom are friends of mine. But also, there are facts about these things. These aren't just strictly matters of opinion.
Yeah, and one of the things that we do, as journalists, when we look at bills coming out of the legislature, out of Congress, or city council resolutions, or whatever, I mean, you always look at who it affects, and what, good or ill, who does this affect? When property taxes are raised, it affects everyone who owns property. So I mean, we report that. If there is a bill that only affects people who are seeking gender medical care, or only affects people who dress in, men who dress as women or women who dress as men, then reporting that isn't, that's what we do.
Right.
These are the people it affects.
Right.
And then it becomes pretty obvious when if there is a minority group and they're the only group affected, then it's pretty obvious that, and we have to point that out.
Which is not to say that there aren't complicated and interesting issues to talk about in all of this. Gender affirming care, it is an interesting question. People making decisions at the age of 15 that could affect the rest of their lives. Is that something that should be given a lot of time and attention? Sure, absolutely. I think the problem is if you actually go and look at that practice, that's what already happens. And a lot of the rhetoric around this kind of makes it sound like, people are dropping their kids off at the curbside at Vanderbilt and they're going in and getting, bodily alterations done and, that afternoon or something. Like, there are, in fact, people who have spent a lot of time, medical associations, developing protocols and standards and treatment practices that in this particular case take several years of pretty intensive dialogue involving everybody, the parents and the patient, the doctors, and so forth. But then, of course, the other part of that is that we do things all the time. Kids do things all the time that are going to affect the rest of their lives. And so it's not really that unique that a 15-year-old makes some decision that's going to affect the rest of their life. That actually happens every day, whether it's, what they study in school that puts them on track to go to the college they want to get into, or, robbing a bank or whatever. And so I think that if the only objection is that it's people under the age of 18, well, like I said, I think that there are interesting conversations to have there, but there are also professionals who have really looked at these things. Similarly, with the example of transgender athletes, that's obviously an interesting question to talk about. It's also one that sports associations, athletic leagues, seem like the best ones to address it. That is really their realm. And that these kinds of conversations can happen among people who know what they're talking about, rather than just being kind of dictated from on high by a legislature. But more than that, it's that the kinds of rhetoric that we hear about these issues is not suggestive of a well-considered, the things that you hear said or tweeted, either by legislators or by people advocating for these things, are not coming mostly from a place of sort of like deep study and understanding of the issues. they're coming from, things that sound a lot like plain old prejudice. Like, these people are disgusting. This is gross. I don't want to have to think about this kind of stuff because it makes me personally uncomfortable. And so, again, when we see legislation that affects everybody's lives, that seems grounded largely in that kind of rhetoric and that kind of response, rather than actually surveying all the information and knowledge that's out there, we're going to say that too. And so, to the question of, what is the, like we've heard from the LGBTQ advocates, why they think these bills are a bad idea. What is the case for why they're a good idea? The case for why they're a good idea is protecting children, a case for which there is essentially no data. Yeah. So that is, I guess, where we are on this. And, I understand people have strong personal opinions about these things, but in the year 2022, I'm just not, as somebody who is close to many people in that, in those various, subgroups of our population, I'm not going to sit here and just pretend that, all of these points of view are somehow equally well-grounded in fact, because they're not. All right, so looking ahead to next week, County Commission is meeting. Not a super exciting looking agenda for their work session, which will be Monday at 5 p.m. in the main assembly room of the City County building. Mayor Glenn Jacobs has had this item on the agenda for a few months. I think it's actually going to get discussed this month, where they're going to rejigger the ambulance contract with AMR. So we'll probably be talking about that a little bit. There's also a resolution sponsored by Commissioners Gina Oster and Terry Hill and Mayor Jacobs, basically asking the federal government to take away the COVID vaccine requirement for members of the military, which is something that Senator Marsha Blackburn is making a big push for in the Senate. It's kind of, I think this is partly a product of the receding pandemic. I know some people don't like it when we say maybe the pandemic is receding, but I think, and we do actually seem to be in a little bit of a bump right now. So everybody, be careful out there. It's certainly still around. It is still killing people. Just had 7 new deaths recorded last week in Knox County. But that said, it clearly is not having the kind of impact on our day-to-day life that it did a year or much less 2 years ago. And so I think that we're starting to see some pushback from people against some of the measures that were put in place then that are still in place, which includes this vaccine mandate in the military. Obviously, a county commission resolution on that is not going to change anything one way or the other. But just kind of like that school board resolution that we talked about, it puts them on the record as asking for this. And then City Council is meeting on Tuesday.
City Council is meeting on Tuesday, and once again, we've talked about this before as well. They're going to be considering an appeal from the Board of Zoning Appeals about the development proposed for the South Knoxville waterfront. That's getting it's been approved by the by the city codes office, which is all it needs because of the special zoning code for the waterfront. But it came with variances, big variances, and there is a group that thinks that they threw in so many variances that it renders the code kind of useless, and it should have gotten a public review, and it hasn't. And so their city council will be grappling with that issue. We had it was going to be on the agenda a couple of weeks ago, got postponed because of illness of some of the people involved, and so hopefully they'll be able to resolve that on Tuesday. There is also going to be discussion of a $1.6 million grant from the Tennessee Department of Transportation to for the Sevier Avenue Streetscapes project, which is also in the South Waterfront. And then one of those interesting things is they're also going to be considering their lobbying contracts. Tony Thompson is a longtime lobbyist in Nashville. They consider a contract with him for $75,000. The Cornerstone Government Services is the city's lobbying firm in Washington. So yes, city government does try to, they have somebody up there to advocate for them. That's going to be at a $180,000 contract. So they're going to consider both of those. And then there's an unusual number of rezoning issues that are coming up. So some of them might be interesting.
All right. Well, we will be back next week to report on all of that. In the meantime, I'm going to go get a root canal. I hope the rest of you have a better week than I'm probably going to.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.